No, 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 man. Oh man, these are awful. But it's just a junk food movie. It's not meant to be. No, it's not a good excuse for any of what this is. Okay, here we go. So, about a month ago, a Facebook friend posted about a military film called Rogue Warfare that was quote unquote taking Netflix by storm. And it showed this picture at the top of the article. And it caught my attention kind of as a completely outdated nightmare. But the more I looked at it and the more I researched and watched, it just got much worse. With a background in theater and a basic idea of what costume design is, and being a massive gear geek, I was really put off by the whole awful excuse for costumes and the tactics and even the weapon choices of, what this film called an international tactics squad. Honestly, I hate to come down so hard on a film, or in this case, films, but when you have the money for 3 movies and about 6 hours worth of film, I just assume that you have the money for good costumes, the props, and, you know, the money to put a basic military advisor on your set. So, really, today I'm here to more talk about, you know, everything that's not related to the plot, and I'm honestly quite not interested in it. I watched it just to get the basic of what was going on, but I really wasn't that interested. But, if enough people give us attention, sure, maybe I'll consider doing that. So, Rogue Warfare is a trilogy that follows an international super military team. It's a mouthful. Composed of US, Russian, UK, Chinese, French people, personnel, team as they attempt to stop a terror network from blowing up a dirty bomb. Turns out that it's not really a trilogy of different stories, it's just a 3-part story movie. It's about 5 hours long. And it's directed by a guy who did a lot of the stunts for Transformers, Star Trek, and the Fast and Furious series. But this guy has quite the record behind him in terms of stunts. He seems like a pretty good guy to go for that kind of stuff. There's probably only one actor you've ever heard of. His name is Will Yun Lee. Enough of that. Let's get into the visual mess of this whole thing. So, the guys in this film are using the Desert Combat uniform. This was a popular camo that was used by the US in the Army, the Marine Corps, the Navy, and the Air Force up until the early 2000s, when this movie was supposed to take place in the years after bin Laden died, which is not the early 2000s. So, the camo here is about 7 years out of date. And to let you know the correct answer on what they should be using multicam, which is the most popular camo at this time, and is currently used by all of the countries that were outlined in this special combat team, except maybe China. I have no idea what they're doing over there. Second to that, these guys are an elite combat team, and they're using, traditional battle dress, which, unless you're an enlisted POG, most people who see combat, like special ops guys, prefer to use combat shirts over combat dress. The fabric is nicer, lighter, it breathes easier, they have moisture wicking properties, and in most cases even have flame resistant fabrics. So they're pretty much better in every single way unless you just want to hate yourself while you're in the combat of the modern era. So the next awful thing I'm gonna go for are those, the knee pads that they have. Well, maybe they don't want to destroy their joints. That's a fair statement, but most people who operate now use built-in pads on their pants, because if you've ever worn a knee pad with straps to your knee, you know that after about an hour or two, they start to just go wherever they please, which is normally, above the boot, where they do nothing for you and your knees are still trashed by the end of the day. So, fair statement, but I guarantee you, operators aren't using this, which is, what these guys are supposed to be. Next up, you can see the holsters in these videos. They're fabric. No one uses those. They suck. They absolutely do. When I first looked into tactical stuff for my own crappy movies, we got a bunch of holsters that look exactly like the ones they're using. They're cheap, they're floppy, and they look cool to people who don't know anything about gear. Nowadays people are using hard shell holsters that are molded for their firearm, they keep their weapon snug, and they usually require a finger to unlock the weapon from the holster so it can be used instead of pulling a fabric. Yeah, just a piece of fabric. They're neat. The battle belts The battle belts I actually recognize because of the aforementioned failed films. They cost about $10 a piece and they come from China, which, if you know anything about the Berry Amendment, none of the American soldiers should be using them. So now we're going to talk about those sad excuses for plate carriers that each of one of these guys is using. Originally, I was just going to complain about the way they were set up, and that they just seemed to put some pouches on the carrier and say, yep, that's it. But I went deeper. So these plate carriers are from, once again, Condor. In fact, it's one of the first things you get if you search up plate carrier on Google. This is a Condor plate carrier, and it runs at about $50. And it doesn't come with a, a dummy plate, which we figured out because when I watched the footage, I realized that their carriers didn't have plates or foam or anything to fill them out. So, to make it worse, it turns out they didn't even wear it the right way during filming. In the photos and the film footage, you can see that the drag handle is on the front of the body of some of these characters. And instead of me just complaining about how maybe it was some cheap pouches and moving on, they didn't even go to the effort to fill them out. Did you just spend all your money on Wu Yun Lee or the backpacks or the helmets? Are the helmets real steel? You wasted all your money on some stupid shit. Looking at the comms, I was disappointed to find out that they also kind of did a low bid situation as well. These guys don't have any ear safety, which looks kind of weird for the kind of helmets they're wearing. You'll notice that they're wearing high cuts, which are really good for Peltor or Swordon systems. Now, once again, yes, they are expensive. I've done the research on this. I understand that not everybody has the money for that, but at least you could get some knockoffs or something that looks similar. You could go ahead and piece it right. I mean, as long as you don't zoom in on the headsets, you could use a lot of different setups out there. You know, I wasn't going to say anything more outside of that question about the high cuts and why not use an ear thing, or, you could use a Kevlar or Mitch helmet, but that photo, that damned photo. Uh, what's with the NVGs during the day? I don't get it. Second, they're not using multicam coverings, and they don't have any counterweights. Anyone who's worn night vision goggles on their head knows that they're heavy. They make your everything sink forward, so you would have counterweights, and why would you want to wear one without a counterweight? I mean, unless, of course, you didn't do your research. Well, that's about it on the costumes. Other things that were frustrating included the elbow pads and the lack of organization of the gear. I mean, there was an odd mismatch in multicam that it just seemed like they had money and then they lost the money and they had the money to get that IFAC. It's a mess, but at least I see an IFAC, so that's good, I guess. Let's talk about those weapons. Or, the lack of good choicing in their weapons. The weapons used are M4 Colt rifles or an M16A1 SR15, not certain for sure, and they have an array of different attachments, bipods, foregrips, that kind of stuff. Of course they didn't buy PEQs, which would be something a little bit more expected, but I don't know. Who am I to judge? It's not like the Marine Corps. Oh wait, the Marine Corps does use them, so if the Marine Corps is ahead of you, that's pretty bad for an operator team. Yikes. The only two that don't really fit an American kind of thing are MP5Ks and an AUG. Now, I did the research and I figured out that the nationalities of each of these characters, they don't even match up to the weapons they're using. They don't even match up to their respective countries. The only ones that do are the Americans and technically the British character, the SAS character. First, we have this Russian woman. She's running a M16A1, when they run SVDs. Hell, I have a mock SVD at home. I guarantee you at least one weapons master in California where they were filming has a prop SVD of some sort. Apparently that was too much work for them, but let's move on. The Frenchman is running an AUG. I did the legwork and search for the current users of the Steyr AUG. Turns out France does not use the AUG. They actually use the FAMAS and recently swapped over to the HK416 in 2017. So, there's that. They could have done the FAMAS and still been okay. If they used the HK416, that would have been great too, but, anything except using an AUG, please. And that leaves us China, America, and the UK. Americans I'm okay with. But let's talk about Mr. MPK5 over here. First off, I don't know why he's using this without a stock. But for the sake of movie fun, I'll ignore it. Gun's still wrong. China actually uses the firearm only with their police forces in certain regions. China creates their own weapons, and that ranges from the Type 81 to their own SMGs like the QCW-05. But fair enough, I'll give them this. I did the research and looked around for who might have a blank firing or just a Chinese weapon, and it seems like, well, first off, there's probably good reason we don't really import or buy many of their weapons, but looking at them, the best I could probably find was a Type 82, which, you know, is a basic, similar-looking weapon, or a PM63 rack, but I'll give them, there's not many variants available, so it's kind of hard to find an exact match. Lastly was the UK, which they use a C8, which is actually pretty similar to the M4. It's part of Colt, fair enough. The only other complaint I have is the pistols. From what I saw, all of them were running M9s, and as you know, each country would have their own respective weapons. But, you know, you'd think that they'd be using their standard. The point for me, yes, you can always argue that they're just running with what they've got, but if you're going to give everyone special weapons instead of giving them all M4s, it's going to look kind of weird if none of the countries actually use them. I mean, they could have had China using an AK variant, it wouldn't have changed too much, it wouldn't have been too hard to just keep everyone running an M4 or something like that, but what do I know, apparently. This is the final note on the end of everything. Just when you do movies that have any sort of tactics, it's good to bring someone who's seen prior combat experience on set, or someone who has an idea of how these things work, ranging from the sniping to via walking on a ridge to clearing a room, and knowing why you do it, because based on how he just did it, he was told to do it, but he doesn't know why he did it. First of these things is the room sweep. My issue is that they obviously knew that they needed to sweep, but this guy doesn't understand why you need to sweep. He just kind of goes in, turns left, and then turns right. He doesn't seem to actually be sweeping. It seems like this was a rehearsed thing, and as an actor, I know you rehearse things, but this is a little bit beyond just, you know, doing the scene. He's not actually looking, he's just doing it because he was told to do it. They also are just throwing the door open in an area where there's terror cells, you know, where there's tripwires and IEDs. Let's just pretend that this is movie magic and we'll ignore that. These guys keep going across ridge lines. I spoke to a Marine about this, a friend of mine. He said, that's the dumbest shit I've ever seen. It leaves you visible along the ridgeline and it makes you an easy target. He said that you want to keep in valleys because it makes you less approachable or visible. Yeah, sure, you have the high ground, but anyone on another ridgeline can see you, and it's dangerous to you. It doesn't matter how cool it looks, people will still think it looks dumb. You can still have cool moments that defy what's expected, but when you do it outside of little combat sequences, it just looks unprofessional. It looks bad. I will say this, the action sequences looked really good. I really did enjoy watching the explosions happen. This guy knew what he was doing, but it keels compared to the rest of this. Just to wrap everything up, I know that movies are meant to be fun and that this is an action movie, but I feel that that's a lazy excuse for not doing your homework. People who live and breathe this kind of stuff are going to see it. Not just me with my useless bit of knowledge about, you know, how combat uniforms actually look, but anyone who's prior military, current military, or just a buff about the whole thing are going to know that this looks a little bit weird. I was disappointed to a point that the terrorists were more up to date with their camo because they were using Desert Marpat, which is still used by the US Marine Corps today. It looks like a lot of hard work was put into this, and being someone who's in the industry, I want to use this more as a learning experience. And for anyone who is in this industry, this is, you know, something you need to look into when you do an action movie. I know there's other fictional movies that, you know, have combat uniforms and stuff, and I know not everybody gets it right. I've seen some who do it right and have a sliver of accuracy, but, you know, this is going to be the first one that gets picked on because it just kind of stands out.